I see this. Hold on.
I think I don't know if I'm able to share screen yet or not.
You
When
should
you're
be
ready.
able to. I'll double check. And Tina, I'm going to repost your chat because if you post early before people show up, they don't see it. So I reposted it. So that's
Okay, thanks, Tom.
sure. So anyway, yeah, Justine, I'll just give a quick introduction, then I'll show whatever you like. That's terrific.
Then we can move on to the main thing you've kind of assembled for us. But I just
Sure.
have, you wanted me to talk about the Caves of Wonder thing. And so I'm just going to do that here. Since you're recording it, you can edit it out and use it however you need.
Sure.
So I just want to do that for you.
Who requested it specifically?
You did.
Did I?
You wanted me to record my Cave of Wonder talk, the cartoony pieces. And so you said you want to make a video about the cartoony pieces.
Oh yeah, separately
If
from
you're
this.
recording, I'm just going to do it here because it won't take very long.
Yeah, so all those stuff that you posted about a week ago, yeah, that was great stuff from Bugs Bunny and.
So I'm ready to talk about that, but I'm not sure if I have a capacity to share screen yet.
You should give it a try, and we'll start right now.
Okay. So, all right, here we go. Okay, have I now got control of everybody's computers? Okay.
Like the outer limits, right?
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing I'm trying to figure out is how to get this damn bar across the top because it's always okay. Never mind.
Well, you can in preview you can get rid of your thumbnails and go to full screen, right? Yeah.
All right, so here's what I want to explain is since a lot of people early on in the Cave of Wonders thing were really struggling with, I don't know, the kind of advanced nature of the course, perhaps, which I wasn't really ready for. I thought I'd put together some cartoon Cave of Wonder images to share with you guys, but the talk I gave online was not really very specific. So I thought I would just quickly run through these here. And then, you can have some other ideas. The problem with this is, to be honest, even though these are cartooning, they're still pretty advanced because these are really great designers. So I'm not sure that this is really going to help in the way that I wanted it to. But these are some Cave of Wonder drawings that they look to me like studies for the Grinch, but I can't be 100% sure on that. Or perhaps for Tom and Jerry since they're from MGM, but they appear to be done by Maurice Noble. They're definitely in his style. So what you're going to notice with these, just to be very quick, is this layer of snow, then this space, and then notice that the detailed edge of the cave is not rendered realistically. It's rendered in an abstraction based on patterns. Sort of it's very abstracted. It's not at all literal. And that for me, as a person who's not really a fan of modern art and abstraction at all, this is the way I like seeing abstraction used, and I do it myself quite frequently. And it's ditto when you go over here, and I don't know if these are just two variations or what. I didn't research the use of these, but you'll notice, you've got your layers, 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 and then darkness, and then you've got this and these and this to give us a little depth. So even these arrangements, they're not random. You've got a little grouping here, a grouping here that curves out from that wall, a grouping here that curves out from the wall, almost making this a full shape, almost making this a full shape. Instead of this stopping dead here, it goes on the ground. Instead of stopping this dead here, it goes on the ground. And instead of this stopping dead here, it goes across to this middle section. So these 1, 2, 3 layers are also repeated on the floor. See, all this stuff I really couldn't point out, in a written thing on the post. It's too ridiculous. And this is a great shot. The same principles are at work here, looking out of the cave. And this is really simple layers work combined with abstraction. Not only the abstraction of the cave walls, which don't look at all like real cave walls, but you don't question it for a second. Ditto Maurice Noble's use of abstraction on these palm trees. They don't look like palm trees at all, but your mind immediately sees them as palm trees because of the reference. Also, the color is, a bit abstract to say the least. I mean, these weird swatches of pink and blues. Again, I'm not going to suffer over these. I just love the way this goes around this corner, you know, and even if this weren't here with Daffy Duck, it would still go around the corner. Notice that even the abstraction, though, it obeys the sense of motion and movement of the cave. And we've got an extra layer of depth back here, and then extra layers of depth back here. I
Can I
think
point out?
rather than talk about this one, I think you can see for yourself what I've been talking about. And someone was interjecting. Was that Tom?
It was me. I was just pointing out how everything was really rounded and curved in that, except Daffy Duck, who had tons of angles all around him, and he really stood out for that reason. Look at all those angles, you know.
That's a great point. Thank you. But yeah, all those pointy angles help him leap up off of that. Additionally, if this cave were over rendered, he would get really lost in it. You know, it would be very kind of hard to pick him out. This one's the more detailed one that I wanted to talk about just briefly, but you know, I think you can immediately see the use of like layers and groupings. You've got this grouping in the foreground, this grouping in the foreground middle ground, this grouping in the middle ground, and then we go into deep space and the space keeps going. This could have just been a flat wall, which maybe you know, maybe a less educated artist would have made this a flat wall. But Maurice Noble bends it, bends it, bends it, and doesn't use perspective lines, but uses the principles of perspective to give us more depth by bending those lines back and not just making a flat, expansive wall. You notice also the use of negative shapes and negative space. Rather than this being a jumble of this all being piled up as a great big one unified mess, he's grouped them into, you know, a couple of different messes, actually 4 messes, really 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th one back here, which I originally saw as part of this, but it's really not. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you kind of have this is sort of a almost a satellite. It's not really attached to any of the other groupings. This is Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, and the reason I wanted to show this was that, you know, as a child, when I saw this, this to me was a cave of wonder. It didn't have any treasure. It wasn't really a proper cave, but this was in the whole Winnie the Pooh series, this was my favorite image ever because I really love these strange places that are created in cartoons. And I just wanted to be in there with Pooh Bear, you know, walking around in that honey. Look at all the details too. You know, you've got the honeycomb, and then you've got the dripping coming out of the honeycomb, and then the dripping that obscures the honeycomb. So you've got 3 different things going on with the honeycombs. You've got the honeycombs, you've got the honey dripping out of the honeycombs, you've got honey dripping over the honeycombs. So you've got, even on this stretch, you've got 3 layers of depth. The underneath, the covering of the honey, the dripping in front of the honey. So, you know, even that, as simple as it seems, is 3 very subtle layers of depth. This, I believe, is from the Disney Aladdin, which I was pretty sure that's what that's from. I'm not 100%, but I'm 95%. But you know, you'll notice that there's a lot of negative ground here. This stuff all goes like that Frazetta into very shadowy, kind of not very highly rendered, which really helps this pop, right? And then you've got the layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then like sort of 5 really. And then notice that this is one mass of coins, so that then when you group these sections of pottery and stuff, they really stick out. And notice that they're grouped, they're grouped, they're grouped, they're grouped, they're grouped, they're grouped, but there's this nice sense of flow that just sort of keeps you going in and out around the drawing. You know, however you look at it, your eye just moves in these S shapes throughout the composition. And then notice one important thing that really helps hold this drawing together, this right here. One little detail over here that adds a little balance, so all your details aren't on the left-hand side. I think that everything I just said applies to this drawing, and everything I said about the Bugs Bunny one applies to this drawing. Everything I said about the earlier you know, Maurice Noble's, everything I said about the earlier Aladdin, all of it applies to this drawing. These are really cool because they're from Popeye's Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. And what's interesting about these is that the Fleischer Studio would create 3-dimensional backgrounds on a great big table that turned. And then they would put, like, here would be the table that turned, and then they would put their animation cells flat at a 90-degree angle from the floor, basically, to the table, and they would shoot through that instead of shooting down on it like typical animation. And then as the character moved, they would rotate the table so that the background moved behind them. And I mean, some of you might be thinking, well, that doesn't really help us because we're drawing, but this background is really broken down. And even though it's 3D, it's still cartoon shapes. They're cartoon forms. So it still completely and totally fits. And notice how these wonderful stairs add a sense of atmosphere because they're kind of collapsed and uneven. Really fantastic. You've got these little foreground elements, so Popeye's moving through space, and then you've got the hints of treasure going on here that you're going to see a lot more of later. Another great 3D Popeye. Here you've got one that appears to be background painting rather than three-dimensional. And this is also from Popeye. And notice you've got, the layer of shapes here, the grouping in layer here, and you've got some more treasure back here. And then you've got treasure back here that you could have just let this be a big pile of treasure, but breaking it up with this little cone here, it adds visual interest, and it also kind of creates a sense of mystery, what's behind there. Also notice that instead of just not neglecting the walls, some of the treasure is on the walls, and they pointed out to one of the students, your walls were a missed opportunity. It doesn't have to be covered, but this little element here really adds interest. I noticed that with my fish in the tank, if I only had decor that was low, plants that were low, a fake log that was low, the fish would stay at the bottom of the tank. But if I put plants that went to the top, the fish would swim towards the top, okay? So if this isn't here, your eye doesn't really pay much attention to what's up here. So this just kind of helps to remind you that there's space up here above Popeye's head. It's not all right across here. So it not only adds to the back and forth depth, it adds to the up and down depth. That's just like a progression in that same series. Notice that these are painted and these are drawn. My guess is maybe characters are going to pop out of these or something later. And lastly, I want to talk about maybe an unconventional thought about a cave of wonder. A cave of wonder could be stretched to, a particular room or a house or whatever that is particularly wonderful. But in this case, it is a cave because it's Bilbo's Hobbit Hall. And I love how, as I think I said in that little talk, that you've got a window into Bilbo's home here and a window into his home here through the doors, which is directly going to play into what Tom and I are going to talk about with the Wally Wood images of looking through windows and doors. But notice also that up here he gives our eyes rest, the artist. By the way, these drawings are very Arthur Rackham-esque if you look at Arthur Rackham stuff. And then, so there's not a lot of rendering in here. It's very selective because your eye doesn't want to get caught up in here. Your eye wants to go here. And he really pops because he's got that brilliant yellow, white, green, and red against this sort of neutral orange background. And what that neutral orange background would usually do is come forward because it's warm. But in this case, it pops back because it's darker. And it also gives you the feeling that, Bilbo's home is a place of great warmth. Notice also how neatly trimmed everything is around the house. So everything you see here tells you something about what kind of hobbit Bilbo is. There's not clutter everywhere. There's nothing here. There's pretty flowers and mushrooms. Everything here tells you that this is a hobbit of rather exquisite taste and particularness. And then this great smog drawing, which is unfortunately rather small. Mainly it's just coins. But students ask, well, how do I know what coins to draw? Or how do I know what leaves to draw? Or how do I know what waves to draw? Looking at things like this helps. They're not really totally random. They're almost in little waves that create depth. These little waves of coins do create a sense of rolling depth, moving backwards. You've got the dragon coming around here pointing to Bilbo. You've got the tail coming around here pointing to Bilbo. You've got the smoke coming down here, which links to this pile of treasure, which curves right to Bilbo. You've got this, which points to Bilbo, and you've got this, which points to Bilbo, and you've got this, which points to Bilbo. And Bilbo kind of brings it back to to Smog. So everything here is laid out to keep your eyes right on this tension between Smog and Bilbo. Do you see that? everything is placed, all the details are placed in such a way that they do not distract from the main event, and they lead the eye to the main event, and they create depth. So there's a lot of openness here, and then selective use of details. And I think I pointed everything out very clearly, so there shouldn't be a lot of questions. Last but not least, the interior of Bilbo's Hobbit Hall is a really great example of Bilbo's own home cave of wonders. Everything is neatly put on its shelves. Nothing is just laying around anywhere. There's a nice window here with a nice window hanging, and this detail of the wood underneath. Everything's neat and tidy around the fireplace with all these terrific details of architecture around the fireplace, and a big dark place to let the eye kind of rest, and areas where there's no details on the walls, just down here around the bottom, very little detail on the floor, just enough to give it depth, just enough to give it depth. And then, of course, Bilbo with his little pitcher of ale or whatever, and his mug, and his wonderful little, cloth napkin on top. So that basically is just a little insight into maybe, how to cartoon your way into a cave of wonder, and how to think differently about what the cave of wonder could be. Um, I guess that's it, unless anybody has any further questions or comments. Going once, going twice. Okay, gone.
Thanks, Justine. That's great.
Okay.
I'm so glad to reconnect about the Hobbit movie. I'd forgotten how much you liked that movie.
Well, when I saw that as a kid, it blew my mind, and it was there were really 5 or 6 moments in my life that told me who I wanted to be from this point forward.
Mhm.
The Hobbit was one of those things that cartoon showed me who I wanted to be from this point forward. Then Star Wars showed me who I wanted to be from this point forward. And then the Beatles showed me who I wanted to be from this point forward. And then Shiva showed me who I wanted to be from this point forward. So there are a lot of those really pivotal moments that I remember. And it's funny because when I first saw that Hobbit, I lusted for it. I wanted it so bad. I wanted to see it so bad. And then, we didn't have home video back then. So I would always wait for it to be on TV again. And then years later, I saw it on video, and I couldn't believe how bad it was. I thought it was horrible. And then a couple years later, I watched it again, and I couldn't believe how good it was. And I've never left the spot where I can't believe how good it is. So, it just took me, like I had this childhood memory of how it was, and then seeing it again, it was different than my memory, and I wasn't ready for that. But then when I went back to it, it was as good as what I remembered. So it's kind of one of those things I've kind of gone back and forth on.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I keep wondering, as the father of a 7-year-old, I keep wondering which of these things are those things for her, And
Yeah,
no.
sometimes you can kind of see it coming and then it doesn't happen, but
Yeah.
sometimes it happens upon reflection. And then, I don't hear people talk about that all that often. What were those pivotal moments for them? But that's something you hear artists speak about more, or spiritual seekers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of people have hated on that Hobbit. They just hate it, because of the cartoony heads and everything. But none of that bothers me at all. I adore it. And someone I saw posted quickly about the Hobbit and about heavy metal and Wizards. And Wizards was another one of those things that was pivotal for me, because that was the Hobbit with sort of a more adult edge. And I thought, oh wow, even though, because I was a teenager when I saw that at a college movie theater, and I thought, okay, I can still like cartoons and be cool. And that was what Wizards showed me, is I can like this and still be cool. So anyway.
Cool. Well, those last 2 images of the Hobbit definitely segue into some of the images. Oh, somebody's got the Hobbit. What is that? A 7-inch, Barry? Oh my gosh. Oh my. Justine, are you seeing that?
No.
Oh, Barry, hold it up again. Barry's. Oh wow.
Oh, that one. Yeah, I've got the album too. So yeah.
Barry's being quiet.
There's
Um,
also, by the way, there was a hardbound Hobbit book that came out at the same time as that movie. And the hardbound Hobbit book, which evidently he's got as well, or anyway, the hardbound Hobbit book, is that the one? Yeah, with all the, is that the one that has the art from the Rankin Bass? Oh, that's different. That's different than mine. I have a hardbound book version of it that it not only has stills from the movie, but they use a lot of pre-production drawings, and they use a lot of what I now know were storyboards. There's storyboard on it, pre-production art, things like that in it. That when I was a kid, I didn't know what any of that was. But looking at it now, thinking, oh my God, they're illustrating this Hobbit. It's not just an illustrated version of the Hobbit. Yeah, terrific. It's also got a lot of the pre-production art in it. But the book goes really expensively. That, like, I saw one, the only reasonable one I've seen recently was like $185. But I had a student, Scott, sent me his copy, so I got mine for free. So yes, I do accept gifts. They won't do you any damn good, but I do accept gifts.
oh,
Okay.
well, cool. Well, but yeah, the last couple images of Bilbo with where you see either into his hobbit hole or out of the hobbit hole, it's going to be sort of like half the focus of some of the upcoming images, which are more which have more of a social environment. There's a lot more characters. There's a lot more of like this, like the societal debris and just clutter of a bunch of people living together, a bunch of characters living together, and it's got a sort of an emphasis on looking at the multi layers, but through a door, or through a window. And so that's what we queued up for Justine.
Without getting into specifics or rants, I'm going to avoid all that. We had a different set of assignments in lecture for today, but the way the culture has turned, I'm too much of a coward to give that lecture anymore. So we've changed it over to this lecture, and I think Tom has an idea of what this final assignment could be. And so a lot of this is going to be improvised, which is fine, because you guys are kind of getting a treat, because a lot of people really enjoy it when we talk about things together. And truthfully, we don't do it that often in public.
Yeah.
We do it occasionally for inking videos or whatever. So for us to, get together and talk like this, both simultaneously, is something that doesn't happen very often, and everybody seems to enjoy it. Additionally, I want to say, for anyone who's maybe viewing this on the internet later, we're not going to try to dazzle you with wild expertise about everything. We're just going to speak very enthusiastically, like total geeks, about this artwork, that, with a trained eye. So, for those of you who might be viewing this out of context, I'm not claiming some great knowledge of when Wally Wood did this at what time and who did what and blah, that's not where we're going. We're just going to celebrate how great this stuff is, point out a bunch of great stuff and how it ties into this class, and then give you an assignment based on that. So that, I just wanted to kind of put that little disclaimer at the front of this for people who watch it on the internet, because comments can be so brutal.
And we're planning one for inking too next semester. I've got a bunch of images I want to show you, Justine, that you haven't seen yet. And so yeah, I'll play Watson to Justine's Holmes a little bit.
Frankly, usually once we get going, sometimes the opposite way around. Tom often sees things that I annoyingly miss.
Maybe not on these images, but that's nice.
Tom's really good at figuring out what by eye, whether things are inked with a brush or a pen. I can't tell. It's surprising, but I really can't tell.
All right, I'm going to share my screen to here, and then I'm going to go to full screen. Okay, and so Justine, if you'll let me start, and then you can have the floor for a long time. So I don't know what in particular you wanted to say about this particular pogo, except that what I've noticed is something we'll notice at least 2 or 3 other times, is that when portraying a door or a window, sometimes you just have to sort of nearly black out or entirely black out that interior, even though it's not necessarily dark. And that sort of helps create that frame where you can see through it. I don't know if that's what you wanted to show about this or other things, but we'll definitely see that 2 or 3 more times. And
I think really what I'm wanting to show here is that details don't necessarily have to be objects, that there's a lot of detail in this image. And Tom has this cursor, not me.
no,
But the details are often rendering like on the bear's pants, you know, or on the fur, or the rendering on the basket, or the rendering on the backrest of the seat, or the rendering on the floor, or the rendering under their feet, or the rendering on the wall behind them. You know, so the details in this case aren't so much objects as details of texture, details that give you a very real sense of place and what it would feel like to be in that room. What details can do at their best is tell you something about the story, tell you something about the characters, perhaps even tell you something about who they are, or in this case, tell you what it would feel like to be in that world and touch these objects or these creatures.
and
I
again,
have a question, sorry, before you go on. So
Yeah.
like the back of the seat, he's got these lines that are going down diagonal, and that's really great because they're running parallel to the seat back. But there's something sort of like a little bit haphazard and uneven about the lines, and they're not really actually describing anything. I love it in his work, but I hate it when I try to do it. Why is that?
Well, okay, I think that I can probably clear that up because I wish I had the cursor, but Tom, bring your cursor down to the right side of the sheet. Okay, so what you're seeing here is it's not haphazard, it's loose, very, very loose. But if you look carefully, you'll notice that there are groupings of lines right across the top. Those were probably all done in one go, da, 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 and then lower, da, 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 and then the third tier down, da, 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 da. So what happens is instead of trying to draw straight lines all the way across the back, he's just doing little rows of lines, little rows of lines, little rows of lines. And he's so masterful that he can do it that loosely and still have it hold together. So what it's really about is understanding he's not trying to do them all at one time. He's not trying to, make them all perfect. He's not really doing them haphazardly. They're just loosely created in horizontal groupings. I hope that gives some clarity.
It does, actually. It's weird because hearing that he went across the top and then the next row down, the next row down, somehow that made it more okay for me.
Yeah, well, I think what makes things okay and not okay for us is sometimes, we can look at something that we like, but we wouldn't want to do. We can look at something that we like, but we want to do, but we can't figure it out. And in this case, I've been able to figure this out. He's being loose on purpose, and yet it's what John Workman referred to in my work as controlled looseness. So sometimes if there's something you can't figure out like that, it could be a controlled looseness. So what you're seeing here is definitely totally controlled looseness. Does that
Justine,
help you?
It does.
Okay.
there are a couple of other examples in this very drawing, like the rabbit here, you got a bunch of lines there done in one go, and then right on top of that, another bunch of lines done in
Yeah.
another go, right? And then also here on the feet, probably here,
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see those.
So
Yeah.
that's something you're going to see in a lot of Walt Kelly. See, I had to do an assignment once where I copied all the great cartoon artists throughout time, and I had to learn all their languages of lines.
Sounds like a transformer.
And what I learned that was really difficult was that there wasn't one Walt Kelly. Oh, so which Walt Kelly do I want to be? There's the Walt Kelly who did loose, simple cartoons, and then there's this Walt Kelly who rendered everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the same of Charles Schulz. Do I want to be early Charles Schulz, where everything's perfectly round and adorable? Do I want to be the middle period Charles Schulz that we're mostly familiar with, where I think he really mastered it? Or the kind of later shaky Charles Schulz? There's not one Charles Schulz. There's not one Walt Kelly.
All right.
I talked way too much about this one simple
I
image.
know. Yeah. All right, we'll move on.
I'm going to get done.
If there's a particular part you want me to zoom in on, Justine, go ahead and tell
I
me.
think all I'd really like to say about this one is that everything we just talked about is true here. I don't know how high res this is.
It's
So
high res.
maybe we can just look at this one briefly, unless you want to say something, Tom, because I think really, the thing about the line, the difference here is that the controlled looseness is more controlled than loose. So that's another thing about Walt Kelly. In the previous image, we saw controlled looseness that was a little less controlled, maybe just because it was larger. That might have been all there was to it.
Mhm.
But here, the controlled looseness is even more controlled because everything is so tiny. What we're seeing is so tiny. If we saw it up close, it might look more like the previous image.
Mhm.
Walt Kelly was a Disney artist before he went out on his own. So let's go to the very top panel. What I want to talk about here is crowd scenes, which was originally going to be part of my assignment. And so you'll notice that there's a crowd in the front, a crowd in the back, but they're broken by that road in the middle to keep everything from getting spatially confused. Additionally, if you note very carefully, each crowd is in a grouping. You'll
Mhm.
notice that on the right-hand side, there's about 4 characters together in the background, in the background area, Tom.
Oh, in the background, these 4, yeah.
Yeah, right. And next to them, there's like 5 characters together.
Mhm.
And then there's like 2 birds together.
Mhm.
There's this little family of bears together, a
Mhm.
little guy by himself who's probably with that family, and then that
Mhm.
little family on the left. So even that line of crowds, it's not haphazard, it's not random. They are arranged in little groupings. And that's one of the important things, that if you want to take the draw a crowd scene, and I'll give more specifics on that later for this assignment, instead of the draw through a window or door, you know, people gather in little clumps, or they get clogged up in little clumps. Or even yesterday, I went to Micanopy to go shopping, or the day before, and there were 2 people standing in the exact place I needed to go, but there was nobody else in the store.
Mhm.
There's just this weird thing that people end up needing things in the same places, or hanging out in little groupings. So, try to be maybe less random with crowds. Is there another crowd on the bottom of this or not?
Oh, yeah. Let me zoom in. There. Can you see that?
Yeah, and I just want to say here that I don't think I even need to tell you where the groupings are.
Mhm.
You can, once you see it, you can start seeing it with your own eyes, and I might repeat it redundantly, but here you've got 3 groupings, really. You've got the 3 large characters on the left panel,
Mhm.
3 small characters, and then like
Mhm.
the 5 characters in the background.
Mhm. And they themselves constitute their own shape, right? So this is one shape, this is another shape, and those shapes aren't identical. They work together rhythmically as a composition.
And they all share a similar motif.
Oops.
Look at the background characters, really.
A similar what?
Background characters on that left-hand panel.
Mhm.
Notice how they're all leaning left, looking right, leaning left, pointing right.
Mhm.
So there's motion there. That's another thing about crowd scenes. This is super important about crowd scenes. You can't just draw in people. Everyone there is doing their own thing. They're in their own life. They're with their own people. And when you draw a crowd scene, it's a great world of make believe. Who is this person as you're drawing them? What's their story? You don't want to just fill in a bunch of people as stand ins. These people are doing something. They're together, they're sharing an experience. This person's in their own mind. And the viewer may never see it, but if you saw it, then you're communicating very clearly. Yeah, the one guy's sucking on the popsicle. That's terrific.
Before you guys go from this, because another thing that Walt Kelly is really great at is like roads and paths. Can we go back up to the top where the road is? And Justine, can you just give me any pointers that you can from what you see up there?
Okay, I want you to look at this in exactly the same way we looked at that image of Smog sitting on the treasure. Notice that there aren't piles of gold everywhere or lumps. There are little groupings of renderings. I wish I had the cursor, but if you go to the puddle right there, that puddle there, notice up top there's 4 little curves, the 4 little curved lines. that are all you need to know about defining that space. It's not rendered all the way across. It's not rendered like crazy. Look at that, and look at the puddle next to it on the left, same thing. Okay, notice also how there's like bridges of details going between the ruts in the road. Bridge, another bridge. Notice how they create a line. That line all the way across that little bridge of detail helps create depth as well, selectively. Notice the big rock there and the pebbles around it, and then to the right of it there are a few more pebbles, and then to the right another little couple marks. So what we've got here is a grouping of 3 things, that create that road. It's not random. This is where a lot of maybe beginner artists get confused about this sort of thing, is that they see it as random and they put it down as random. But when you really look at it, there's absolutely nothing random about it. It looks random because Walt Kelly is showing you the randomness of a dirt road, but he's very carefully planning out how you see it.
So when you were describing the curves that are going into that largest puddle on the top, but also to the left, sort of like the back side of that same puddle, they curve kind of like the opposite way. Or it's not really the opposite way, it's the opposite side of the same curve.
Yeah, it's the opposite side of the same curve. Right, right. Absolutely. And you can see it on the right hand side as well. There's one curve coming out the top on the far right of that
Yeah.
puddle, and then look above it. Look above it. There's a curve going into the next shape. So those aren't random. Those 2 forms are connected not by lines, but by the empty space that is defined between them.
Justine, while you're related to this, as what you were talking about before with controlled looseness, and you're continuing to talk about the amount of planning that goes into this sort of drawing, can you talk a little bit about, well, maybe particularly for a beginner, on planning where that controlled looseness goes, or planning, what kind of...
Those are really great questions.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer it. The answer I'm giving may be frustrating, but it's also true. And the answer that for me is that when you sit down and you're well trained and you know what you're doing, you start just moving your pencil around on the paper and you intuitively start doing things. You're not really necessarily consciously planning everything so much as these things start to happen, you see them, and then you edit them with your knowledge later. So it starts out with an instinct of just knowing how to do it. And then with all your knowledge, you go and go, oh, I kind of instinctively, connected those 2 ruts with those lines in the middle. And I sort of connected them again with those lines going across the other way in the middle. And now I can pull on that and create deeper space. So it goes from instinct to intellect. But when you're learning it, it goes from intellect to instinct. See, when you're learning it, it's intellect to instinct. And when you're good at it, it's instinct to intellect.
So as I'm learning this, do you have ideas of ways I can give myself some support on the page to build up that space to make those kind of... I really like this minimalist rendering. I don't know if minimalist is the right word, but I love how concise these things are on these pages.
Okay, here's my advice. Here's what I would do. I would strip away everything. Just take that big chunk of road, just that chunk of road, the whole chunk, trace it, then draw it, then draw your own version of the same thing using the same principles. That way it goes from seeing it, because we don't see correctly. We see what we think we see. We don't see what is. If we saw what is, we wouldn't be almost at civil war with each other in this country. We see what we want to see. We see what we think we see. Tracing it breaks it down to where you're seeing what is, not what your brain is telling you is. Then drawing it brings it into your body and into your mind. And then drawing variations on it is helping you to internalize those lessons. So you're now turning them out on your own. So trace, copy, and then rearrange those elements to create your own little stretch of road. And then do that for trees, and do that for a crowd, and do that for treasure, and do that for rocks. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, I did one. I'm the person who did that one tracing of Walt Kelly's, and now I'm doing another one. So it sounds like this is just the path that I'm on for the moment.
If you're on this
Patience.
path, if you're connecting with Walt Kelly, if you're on this path, if you're beginning to see these things, follow it through. I copied Alphonse Mucha's work for years. Copied his style, and then eventually it started to come out as me. So you can, what you want to do, if you want to draw a dirt road, you don't want to copy that road. You want to trace that road, copy that road, draw that road. But when you come to do it yourself, you want to take those same principles, rearrange them, and recreate that road in your own way. So what I'm encouraging you to do is, if this is working for you, and if you're discovering things, stick with Walt Kelly until he's done teaching you. Don't feel you need to jump off onto something else. Don't get antsy.
Okay, thank you.
As my spiritual teacher, Brother Shankara, told me as I was moving forward, I said, should I change my mantra now? And he said, stick with the one who got you there.
Justine, if I was to trace this, and I know I probably should, I would pick this corner right here. And we don't have to talk about it because we'll get on another, 20 minutes. But look at that. Oh, it's
Beautiful.
killing me. It's killing me because
Well,
it's beautiful and it's also inaccessible to me at the moment. Like a lot of the students here, I don't know what kind of decisions he made when he made that. And
again, we can't go into every inch of these.
no.
But it does look to me like things
No.
I've seen you reaching for many times.
Yeah.
And getting.
Oh, thanks. All right, let's go to the next image and see what's there. Oh, and there's that classic.
Okay, so I think I talked about this one in the details lecture. So I'm not sure I want to talk about it. Did I talk about this one at length in the details lecture?
I don't remember, to be honest.
If you did, it's not one I saw yet.
Okay, so then let's talk about it. Let's just go down to the bottom. Let me point out one of the most significant things that's going on in the bottom panel with the junk pile. Okay. This is probably blatantly obvious, but it's very helpful at this point. Notice how much he doesn't draw in that junk pile. Notice how much black there is to help the objects pop forward. Notice how many things he grouped in that little basket. Right? Notice that there's like a couple jugs together right underneath that basket.
Here.
Notice all the black everything is swimming in, rather than trying to fill that with junk or fill that with the rendering of grass. Which, by the way, you could have rendered the grass in there. It would have worked just as well because it would have created a pattern and receded. Notice also that we've got a junked car in the background, middle background, and then another pile of junk in the background. And notice also behind the tree, we've got some junk. Behind the bathtub, another little pile of junk deeper in space. And notice that it all reads. So part of your details is about framing your details so they don't become a jumble. Either framing them in black, or if we go back to the gold pieces in Aladdin and the Hobbit, framing them with the simple texture of the gold pieces. So you basically need to have something to break up the mania of all the details. Period. Rest. You need a little rest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so what I want to talk about here is that middle panel left-hand side. Okay, let's take a quick notice of how you've got this curve of stuff in the foreground. And then directly behind it, you've got another little parallel curve up above.
Oh.
No, to the left, to the bottom of the sign. Go
there?
to the bottom left of the sign.
Oh,
and go across that line over to the tire.
oh, over the tire there.
Yeah, okay, see,
Gotcha.
that is sort of running parallel. So what you, and then notice the top, we've got the bathtub and another line. So what you've basically got are 3 lines of junk that are kind of running parallel. Rather than covering that whole ground with stuff, rather than going totally random, we've got 3 lines that are kind of running parallel to each other. Notice again on the right-hand side, the same thing. You've got the line of junk in the foreground, the line of junk in the middle ground, the car in the background. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Notice how often 3s are coming up, 3 marks, 3 lines of details, you know, and that's how it looks. That's one that answers many of your of the couple questions I've heard, is how do I pull this off? And one thing is you've got to thinking about how you arrange your details and what's in between them. I hope that offers clarity and makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Notice in the bottom right-hand panel, all the same principles are applying, except that instead of it being parallel, it's creating like a Z curve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tom, see the Z?
I see this, and then this is sort of that.
Yeah, there's sort of like a Z curve, but there's also, it's also continuing. He didn't just hold it to the Z shape. He also let it run across the right-hand
I see.
side
You're
to
saying
create some
this,
balance.
this,
And he
this.
also put this satellite tire on the far right, this inner tube, to also create balance. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to create some patterns, some rhythm, and then you're trying to create some balance, and you're trying to create areas of rest. And the takeaway from this is that to verbalize this, it all sounds absurdly complicated. But the truth of it is, once you start doing it, it starts to become intuitive. As I said, it's going to struggle through your intellect before it gets to intuition. But once it gets to your intuition, it passes through the intellect to be refined. Am I making sense to everybody, or am I just speaking abstract bullshit? Am I doing, you guys are following me?
Justine, just say that last part again. You said about the intellectual and
At the stage of learning, you're using your intellect to develop your instincts.
okay.
Once you get good at it, you'll be using your intellect to refine your instincts. So the roles change. It starts with intellect now. As you internalize it, it becomes instinctive. Once you get to a certain level, you draw instinctively, and then you pull on what you intellectualize to refine what you've done instinctively. So the balance will shift from intellect to intuition.
Okay.
Tom, I haven't heard a lot from you, so by all means, join in.
Sure. Trying to keep up with cursor control.
So what I really wanted to talk about here, I'm going to simplify what we're going to discuss here. I want to talk about the groupings of in the crowds and what they're doing. You've got this guy in the foreground that Tom's cursor's over. No, on the right, the first guy. Then you've got the 2 guys in the background who engaged in an action together.
These 2?
And then behind them, the darker, shaded people, the shaded people in an interaction.
In here?
And also to the other side of the man.
There's a lot of people. Which, these people?
The dark
These people.
in the middle, yeah.
Gotcha.
But you'll note, and also in where Tom was a minute ago, where the white shrouded women, there's like 4 people there all together, and then there's the guy sitting by himself. So everybody is grouped into these actions, with lots of open space in between them, and then animals. The other thing I want you to look at is how fabric is being used. You've got people in their nice, crisp, new fabric, and then over top, you've got awnings with old, worn fabric. Okay, so those are how your details are telling you something about time, the passage of time. You've got people in new clothes, and then you've got an old, worn, tattered piece of fabric above. And this is another thing that properly used details can do for you in a drawing or a painting or whatever, is you can time travel. Drawings will show you the past. A great work of art will show you the past, the present, and the future. This market has been here a long time. You can tell that from the dilapidated fabric up top. You can tell that from the cattywamped thing directly underneath it inside that opening. And then you've got people buying new things to take home in the future. So you've got this whole wonderful notion. So think when you're illustrating, am I showing you a moment in time, or am I showing you a past, present, and the future? And that's what makes illustration and art so wonderful, is that, you know, it opens up. Wow, what was this like in the past when this awning was new? What are they going to do when they go home with this thing they're buying? You know, that's how the imagination starts to work, is that a great drawing will show you past, present, and future through the details. Okay. This one I just wanted to show because I like the grouping of people on the left, and then the primary character in the foreground, the guy in the background, and then you've got the crowd, the grouping of birds on the ground, the grouping of birds going up diagonally, and then you've got birds happening in the rafters up above. And notice also, you know, that we don't have these posts going all the way across the image, because that would be distracting. There's three columns, and then you've got your characters. If this person had put another column on the left, it would have been very distracting. So part of this is learning when to stop repeating the pattern, when to drop things out so that your eye can see what it needs to see. Notice also that a la Frazetta, there are no details behind that flock of birds. Look how completely undetailed that window door space is behind the birds. Look how loose that is. You may have never noticed it before. That looks like something from a sketchbook, because we don't want the birds being lost in all that detail. Okay, we can go to the next one. This one is another example. We've got a man selling a new rug in the foreground. Brand new, no one's ever used it. We've got people in the background wearing their clothes, which they're wearing in the present and have been wearing. And we've got tattered awnings up above. And then we've got new fabrics being sold on the left-hand side. So he's using the fabric alone is telling you the story of time in this painting. Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, just in case you're thinking in your mind, like I used to think as a student, she's making too much of this. She's overthinking this. There's no way all this is really there. This is all controlled. Look at the one on the right. Ignore the one on the left for right now. Look at the one on the right. Look at the mosaic. Look at the mosaic in the background. Look at where the tiles are missing. Look at where the tiles are darker. Look at where the tiles are. Now let's go to the next image. Notice where the tiles are missing now. Now go to the next image.
Oh.
See, I am not, making too much of this or seeing things that aren't there. This artist is completely controlling how the details work with the background rather than distract from it.
Wow.
Because notice that tile over his head is painted in, and over the other head, it's off the wall.
It's also a tiny bit darker.
Notice on the left-hand side how many of those titles are broken around that head, but only the 2 are broken on the right-hand side, on the other one. Notice that little chipped corner is not in the other side.
Which one?
The chipped corner of these 2. The 2 that are missing. There's that corner that's left, and it's not there over there. You know what that tangent would have looked like going right into that man's eye on the left-hand side?
Oh, that.
So the reason I wanted to show these paintings was that these tiles, whether they're chipped or broken or intact, have been arranged to suit the image. The details serve the image, not the other way around. And yes, it is as heavily thought about as I'm saying, or that background would have been the same in both paintings. Any comments or questions?
I have one comment.
Yeah.
Look at this little bit of red on this column here, balancing out. Yeah.
And it's not on the left.
Yeah.
You know what that is on the left? That gold is relating to the gold on the other guy's scarf.
Yeah.
See, that's balance. I know, I'm sorry, to beginners, this is very overwhelming. But the thing about this is it was overwhelming to me at one point too, but over time, you know, I think actually it's less overwhelming to see it clearly. It demystifies it.
Mhm.
You can see that the artist has intentionally recreated the space to make the image work. Okay, next. Okay, that's one of my images, which is leading into our seeing things through doors. That was my first Lucasfilm piece. I love the frame thing through doors and windows, and I didn't realize it, but that was something that Wally Wood did a lot too, and that's coming on soon. This is all details from the Star Wars universe. This was my first Lucasfilm assignment. I was very nervous when I did it. It was a long time ago. Looking at it, I never was that thrilled with the drawing. You know, I like the one I did for them later, but you know, I definitely used that door to create, you know, a separation in depth by using that warm neutral against that blue background to push that back.
And you've even got, you know, you've got a grouping of characters here. You've got a grouping
Yeah.
of characters there. Obviously, a grouping of characters there. One lone person.
A grouping of droids around that land speeder,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and then the
Little land
grouping of
speeder.
droids up top.
Yeah.
Interesting note about details in Star Wars. Notice that two of those droids have visors up top, and one of them has a little eye hole.
Hmm.
I had originally drawn the ones up top, Tom. The ones up top.
Oh, sorry.
That
This.
one's got an eye hole. The other two have visors.
Uh-huh.
And in the original drawing, they all had visors. And they caught me at Lucasfilm and they said, in our universe, we don't really use visors. We use the little eye holes like on R2-D2. Can you change at least one of them? And I thought, oh God, how did I not notice?
Mhm.
As big a Star Wars fan as I am, how did I not notice that those visors weren't part of their visual universe?
And it works better with that little what do you call it? That eye nodule.
Eye hole, I don't know, little eye plug. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, I don't think it would be as strong an image with 3 visor robots. They'd be.
Yeah, it's, you
Yeah.
know, they didn't. The strange thing is, I found that Wizards of the Coast would ask for the same numbers of changes on Dungeons and Dragons drawings that just, you know, weren't as culturally significant. But Lucasfilm would pretty much okay everything with one change.
Hmm.
You know, the stakes were higher, and it was easier to. They were easier to work for. Okay, next. That's another one where we're looking through a door. You know, and there's kind of getting ready to go into the battle here. And all the details in the background are work with the Star Wars universe. One of the things that made Star Wars so incredibly refreshing was that most all science fiction at that point, everything was shiny and new and looked like it had never been lived in. In the Star Wars universe, everything looked like it had been used for 100 years before this staff got it. And then if you look at like the TV show Firefly, you know, they took that, you know, they worked with that same idea in Firefly. So that's the thing about Star Wars details, is everything can't be shiny and new. So let's move on to the Wally Wood, because I didn't want to have to follow Wally Wood. That just seemed really unfair. So here we've got, you know, I think what could be one. So here you can have one of 2 assignments to choose from. One, draw a crowded market scene. It can be of real people or cartoon characters. It doesn't matter. Draw a crowded market scene. It can be outdoors on a dirt road if you want to practice your dirt roads. It doesn't matter. Just so that, you know, you use the principles of grouping the people, having them engaged in things. Think about, you know, showing the passage of time. Or you can show things, you do a detailed assignment where you show things through windows and doors like Wally Wood and whatnot. So what's happening here is you've got this wonderful, you know, view that you can see through on the right hand all the way through. But what makes it not too confusing is you've got that floor line, you've got the 2 characters that are breaking the floor line into the background space. And then you've got on the right hand side this other object forward as well to create a little balance. So you don't just have everything being broken in that central left hand side. You've also got the space being broken on the right hand side. Tom, you picked these. So you must have seen things in them you really wanted to talk about. So why don't you?
Sure. Well, this was an introduction for me. Like this particular image, this was one of the simpler ones. What I was seeing more was the difference between black and white. Black is the outside in this version, and it's a lot more white, especially in the middle ground. The middle ground's all white. Background is solid black, and then it's a more contrast world on the inside and the foreground.
Great point. Yeah, the middle ground is totally white. You're right. The deep background is black and gray, and the foreground is high contrast black and white. I'm glad you're here to point that out, because that's something I probably would have seen eventually, but I don't think of everything. But that's a good point. That use of the high contrast, black against white, white against white, and black against gray. That's really helpful. The dark gray in the background of that is Cipitone. No, it's not. That is hatching.
No. There's Zipatone in there. We'll zoom in if you like.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was Zipatone. You're right. Okay. That could have been hatched, but it wasn't. You're right.
I showed this image just because of the utter simplicity of, again, like that first image of Pogo on the train. The door is solid. This window is solid black. This is solid black. Heavy shadows because there's so much brightness. And the same thing here. That's all.
Yeah, it should also. I love how the black and white. And
Oops.
The panel at the top right. I love how the black against the white creates such a strong barrier between the foreground and the background. And there are no details there. The details are in the foreground, the details are in the background, and there's no detail in that middle. It's just contrast.
Mm-hmm.
See, many of us, myself included, might have been tempted to render some lines on that white space. But, Wally Wood teaches us we don't have to do that. Okay, so there's things that's keeping this from being a total disaster visually, as far as what's going on background to foreground. One is, notice the concentration of black at the top above the window, and then the concentration of more white and open at the bottom part of the window. And notice how you've got this chaos of objects, these airplanes, but there's a lot of white space and clouds around them. You see, if that had all been polluted with imagery and planes all the way through the sky, it would have been confusing with the doodads and knickknacks on the right-hand side. And also notice that there's really very, very little black spotting in the background. And also notice how in the buildings, it's basically all verticals. Vertical line rendering, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. It creates a pattern. And then you break it with the strong diagonals of the firing missiles and the wings of those airplanes. When you break that at that vertical, it's very powerful and very dynamic. And then when you get on the inside again, it's sort of like all the technology, it's still based on a vertical and horizontal pattern. Even though it's broken by the circular bend of everything, it's still arranged on a grid in a way. Mm-hmm. And then the creatures are totally organic. So that's one of the things that happen. That's why I recommend to a lot of students, use rulers, okay? I know it's hard, but use rulers, because you use rulers on those objects in the background, you use perspective on those objects in the background, and then your organic stuff in the foreground is going to pop out of that. If you ink everything without using rulers and draw everything without using rulers, and everything is drawn with the same organic freehand look, it turns into a bit of a uniform mush. But if you use, a lot of verticals and horizontals and rulers in the background elements, then the stuff that is much more organic will pop more. Tom, you picked these images, so please talk about them too. This one is, of course, Wally Wood and Dave Stevens. Dave Stevens inked it. I don't know who inked those others. Wally Wood did do a lot of his own inking, but
I think they were Wood.
Okay. I love how you've got the white upright girl. Then you've got the mother, and then you've got the white window on the left, and then you've got the black of all the tech behind her. All of it arranged on, horizontal and vertical grids. And then, you got her whiteness pointing right into the white of the background with a few bits of black, top, middle, and bottom to balance things out. If that were all white back there, all light, it would have looked out of balance. You really need those blacks there to attain balance. Notice that she's dressed in white against the black, and he's dressed in black and white, mainly black, against the lighter colors.
And Justine, going back to the painting with the broken tile work, this window, which allows her, allows her to pop off the background, is created in exactly that same space,
So really the thing about details is using them selectively and consciously. So when you look at these images, you can think, well, gee, if I'm going to do something seen through a door or through a window, what window or door are we looking through?
Cool.
And someone in the chat's pointing out there's a bolder line on the boy, and it is true. Although the reason I'm not really talking about lines here is because that would be stuff I'd cover more in an inking class. And I'm trying to talk about other things, but it's worth pointing out, especially since someone mentioned it. I just saw it pop up. That bold line on his head against the thinner lines in the background helps him maintain that he's forward. Notice also that there's a little white space between the top of his head and the rocket. Notice there's a white space around his chin and under his jaw and the rocket. If those lines had went right into his chin and jaw, it would have been very uncomfortable. Notice that Wally Wood didn't bother to leave that opening on his chest and on his back when the wings hit his chest and back, because it's not as important and it's going right into the black. So Wally Wood chose when to break the line. And what that does is it not only does it give you the 3D pop, it also it's like the effect of light, that the light bouncing off of his head and jaw kind of, blurring the background elements.
That's inked by Stevens, of course, and it's also, for what it's worth, it's inked on tracing vellum, so it's a little bit blurry because it's
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I think this is the last image we have, another chaotic space image.
Yeah, and okay, so let's see again. What you've got here is the same stuff as before. You've got the highly grid-like doodads of science fiction around, and then you've got the white mirror area to separate it. And then notice that when he goes into the background, you've got the one character in the center, but there's a lot of black in there to pop off, so that white pops off of it. It's not over rendered. If everything in that space were totally rendered, it would become very mushy, but that white against that black is very striking and very strong. Tom, you picked it, so go ahead. What am I not seeing that you wanted to talk about?
Oh no, actually, the two space images I actually found. Let me see if that was it. Oh, we do have one more if you want to look at. No, I was actually really excited to hear what you would say about this one and the other interior, because they are a little. They're really dense, and they're denser than anything I would try. But it's actually really interesting to hear you talking about the grid behind and how everything works on top of this grid, even the sort of rounded grid here. And I actually hadn't really thought of that the organization and the fact that it's highly structured in the back with these doodads and things lets him pop and lets this stand out as well as the previous one.
Also, notice the diagonal jutting out of that grid in the background above his head.
Here?
Yeah. Notice how that sort of goes with the diagonal of his shoulders. Notice how it goes with the diagonal of his gaze. Notice how it goes with the diagonal of that arm. Almost more of a horizontal. No, the arm of the guy in the background.
Oh yeah.
So you've got those diagonals and you've got those horizontals. They're all repeating. And what I try to say is, if you don't think that diagonal object in the top right is important, imagine the drawing if that weren't there. Wouldn't it seem out of balance in some way? So that's one of the games I play. How intentional was this? Well, what would it look like if it weren't there? And notice a lot of this is also about what he's not drawing. That hose at the top, there's no outline. It's just those half moon shapes repeating over and over again. I mean, in a way, when you look at it and the details as overwhelming as they are, if you look at that hose, it's remarkably simple. That's one of the things about, a real master is that, there's sort of a deceptive simplicity to it. Notice also that the background elements are high contrast for the most part, very little detail, black, white, minimal detail. The detail rendering is really on the characters.
Mm-hmm.
The background is largely in black, sharp black, white, high contrast. And then the textural rendering is in the foreground and in the character back there. So when not to render becomes important too. If you render everything with the same steam, it's going to become a mush. When do you go to high contrast? When do you go to low detail? When do you go to full rendering? Again, this is a lot to take in, but over years, these are secrets that would have probably revealed themselves. And now you have a little guidebook to these secrets. And what maybe seems baffling now, I don't think I can fully explain everything, but time will explain it.
Mm. This is
So, yeah, that was great because the screen is it's just one thing. It's just the space scene. It's so simple in comparison, but so important. I love the flow across the heads, not the big guy in the middle, but there's a curve. See, notice that great C curve?
Mm-hmm.
Those characters are arranged in a C curve that kind of comes right out of that screen and goes right back into the background. And then that guy's gaze brings you also back into the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Those aren't randomly arranged people. And that makes it look really active, even though nobody's really moving. It looks really active because you've got that fantastic C curve in there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff I've missed, but I can't spend the next 10 hours.
I'm gonna stop sharing at this point.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything to say, or Tom, or anybody?
I can pull up old images, or we can continue however you like.
So that's all I got for you guys. That's all I have in mind right now.
And so the exercise, and we'll make sure it goes up tomorrow morning or this evening or something, is to either draw a crowded market scene or a scene in which we're seeing one layer through a door or a window or something.
Yeah. And how do you detail what's on the outside? How do you detail what's on the inside?
Mm-hmm.
And when do you choose not to detail? As far as how it's finished, I don't really care. As far as how big it is, big enough that you can say everything you want to say, but not so big that it becomes an overwhelming chore. And mainly just, you should really, at this point, take not just everything from this lecture, but take everything from the prior lectures and put it together. The real point of this assignment is taking everything you've learned, everything you're figuring out, and put it together. Not in a hodgepodge. Oh, I have to use something from here. I have to use something from here. Just take everything you've been exploring, and push that forward. Don't use every single thing I talked about. That's not possible.
Justine, I remember in another lecture a year or two ago in class, you showing more crowd scenes and more the way people stand in groups and the way they cluster. And if you can dig up any of those images, send them to me and I'll make sure they get posted, because I remember, but I can't remember which ones they were.
Okay. Well, I don't have, this is a new computer and I don't really have all my art files on it.
Okay. Well, I can dig around too.
But I use a lot of my own images for that too, because, I always like to think about what's the person in the crowd doing. I mean, have any of you ever watched a movie and a sort of secondary character, or even a character even less important than secondary, and you think to myself, this movie sucks. I want to know what her story is. And that's kind of what I think about with the backgrounds is, these people all have their own stories. And to tell you the truth, a lot of the stories I've told are about characters I've seen in movies that weren't an important part of the plot. Like, oh, wow, I want to tell that person's story, and then of course it turns into my own story from there. But, I frequently think to myself, man, they really missed an opportunity here.
Okay, well, now would be a good time to probably to sign off. I really appreciate you going into depth like this.
If anybody has
Justine.
any questions, I'm happy to answer them for a few minutes. I apologize to the people who are struggling at the beginning level and are a little overwhelmed, but I promise you, if you keep going, you know, this will all resurface in years to come.
And Mauricio and others asked, the images we saw, I'll make sure are posted in a variety of places. We always shoot for a little redundancy. And Justine, make sure you, if you don't mind, you'll share some of the images from the cartoon lecture, especially the Hobbit images, because I think most of the Warner Brothers were posted in a link, but maybe those 2 Bilbo images or something, send me those and I'll make sure those are uploaded too. So we covered a lot today and I almost have forgotten some of it, like, you know, those early images of Bilbo in his little hole were so comforting, and I could learn a lot from those, but I'm so overwhelmed by the Wally Wood images that I feel like I've learned nothing. But then if I go back, I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember learning something.
You know, the funny thing is, you know, when I talk about this, all this stuff, I think to myself, how come I'm not thinking like that when I draw? You know, so I'm saying all this stuff that sounds like I know all the stuff that I'm thinking about all the time when I'm drawing, but a lot of it is me reminding me of shit that I've forgotten. You know, and the other thing is you really can't address all of it in the drawing. You know, it's just bits of it, right? So that's the other thing about all this. So, you know, it all comes and goes, and you know, it sounds like I'm really thinking heavily when I draw about all this, but you know, again, I keep seeing things like when I do these lectures, I'm frequently seeing things that I didn't notice before. A lot of the things that I'm telling you are things that I'm discovering in that moment. I'm still learning every single day. And if I wasn't, I would kill myself. I mean, you know, I just couldn't stagnate like that. I couldn't stand it. And I'm learning how to be a better teacher, how to be a better person. You know, none of this is, there's no perfection here. It's just a lot of it is just me teaching you things I wish I would remember when I drew. You know, me reminding you of things that I wish I were better about. You know, sometimes if I come down on you in a lecture about something that maybe seemed lazy, that might be to remind me as much as you. You know, I'm not pointing fingers. Any finger I point at a student, I'm also pointing at myself.
Well, I definitely want to draw a little crowd of bunny rabbits and little bears right now.
Yeah, please do.
So
if we're done, I'm going to go out and take a hike.
Yeah.
But if you guys are good, and nobody seems to be jumping in with questions, I tell you what I'll do before I go out and hike is I'm going to put a post in the group where anything you thought of after the fact that you wish you would have asked, you can ask now. So this is not your last chance and you've blown it. I'm gonna right now post before I go out, hey, anything that's come to you now, here I am.
Great.
Okay.
All right.
See you guys later.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon and see you later at tonight's call.